And, a lot of times I think that can happen because what we know is normal, sometimes we feel like that's the best it's going to get. And a lot of times that's just how life goes and how relationships are, and that's how our mind works. We know if we really sit there and think it through that there's better things and it could be better. But for some reason, when we get stuck in those ruts like that, we almost get to the point where we accept what's there and just take it for what it is, and we don't try to make things any better. And when that happens, you can actually go backwards, and it can just continue to get worse and worse if you don't do something about it. This week on Marriage, Life, and More, we continue our series on Marriage Reset. As we kick off episode 5 of that series, we'll be back to get into that right after this. Welcome to Marriage, Life, and More. This is a podcast about marriage, Bible, and book studies, and we interview people that have inspiring stories. I'm Daniel Moore, your host, and here with me today, once again, have my beautiful co-host, my wife, Michelle.
Hey.
Thank you guys for joining us this week. If you're not familiar with our show, check out our website at marriagelifeandmore.com. Our platforms are there, YouTube and Rumble links. We're also on the Christian podcasting app Edify. And we're also on your Alexa and Google smart devices. You can visit us on social, on Facebook, Instagram, and X at CT Gap Online. If you're a fan of our show, please subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment on our platforms. Give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. And we'd be grateful and thankful to you for doing that. As we mentioned in the intro here, we have reached episode 5 of this extended series that we've been doing called Marriage Reset. And this is just an attempt to pour into you about being soulmates in your marriage, because sometimes we get to a point of being stagnant, kind of being a rut, and it kind of feels like we are living with a roommate instead of a soulmate. And so that was the whole intention of this series. Hope you guys have gotten something from it so far as we've gotten through the first 4 episodes. This week we're going to start episode 5. And this week we're going to be talking about feeling neglected, 3 sacred moments in marriage.
Diane Soley once said, "Love doesn't commit suicide. We have to kill it. Though it's true that it often dies of our neglect." Mia felt like she was living out her dream with Alex. Their story started when a coworker introduced them at a mutual friend's birthday gathering. From the very beginning, their connection was strong. They both shared a passion for nature and loved spending weekends discovering new trails or taking spontaneous road trips. Alex had a way of making Mia feel seen and heard. In every conversation, he was fully present. Their personalities balanced well. Alex's vibrant and social energy complemented Mia's more reserved, thoughtful nature. His unexpected proposal on a hillside during one of their weekend adventures was straight out something Mia only imagined. Their wedding, filled with joy and close-knit loved ones, marked the start of a new chapter. Returning from their honeymoon immersed in the glow of newlywed life, they felt ready to take on the world together. Not long after, they welcomed a baby into their home, followed eventually by 2 more. Slowly but surely, life got fuller and more complicated. The long talks they used to enjoy faded into hurried exchanges about school pickups, work meetings, grocery lists, and who was grabbing dinner on the way home. Even though they still cared deeply for one another, the romance and sense of adventure took a back seat to the pressures of family life. Their mornings begin in a rush, ending with half-hearted goodbyes. Evenings consisted of managing work, temper tantrums, and to-do lists. Frequently, one fell asleep on the couch while the other scrolled through their phone, both mentally tapped out from the day. Intentional connection became rare, with their only shared ritual being the last glance at their phones before sleep took over. Mia often voiced a growing sadness. She felt invisible, like Alex had become emotionally distant. He's always glued to the TV, she lamented. On the other hand, Alex believed he had become an afterthought, edged out by the kids, deadlines, and seemingly endless obligations. Mia barely looks up from her phone when I'm around, he would counter. It's not uncommon for married couples to find themselves living like co-tenants instead of partners. Sometimes it's burnout. While you're running on fumes, there's little left to give. Other times, the rhythm of life gets too noisy, muting the subtle signs each spouse sends when they reach out for connection. When those cues are missed repeatedly, conversation becomes transactional and interaction shallow. Here, it's important to recognize what's happening between Mia and Alex. They're drifting apart not because of the active disdain or hostility, but due to subtle indifference. This form of neglect isn't fueled by anger or resentment, but by unintentional choices made daily. Turning toward work, errands, or screens instead of one another. It might seem harmless, but over time, it creates a silent wedge. They've unconsciously allowed their relationship to drop down on the priority list, believing they can come back to it later. When work calms down, when the kids are older, or when there's finally space in the budget for a night out. The real danger lies not in their packed schedules, but in how they choose to spend their rare moments of quiet. Rather than leaning into those opportunities for connection, they surrender to do what could be called relational distractions, activities and habits that crowd out meaningful interactions while offering easy, guilt-free escapes.
I'm going to have you stop right there for just a minute. So as we started out this episode, as you've been reading this story, I've already kind of having flashbacks about when we were married and had all the kids at home. And I think that probably a lot of people that are listening right now can probably resonate with this.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
You know, especially when the kids come into the equation and, you know, jobs and busyness and that kind of thing. We've talked a little bit about busyness already in this series, I should say. But, you know, a lot of times when kids come in, they do kind of take over. And it's real easy to, you know, put all your time and effort into the children. And especially if they're all young, you know, sometimes couples will have kids real close together.
Yeah.
So all three they might have two or three at a time that are still in diapers or whatever, you know. It's like if you have them real close, then the younger they are, a lot of times the more they demand when they're that young. And, you know, I think whenever, you know, I look back at our relationship and where we've came from, our kids weren't that young necessarily, but they still took a lot of time and a lot of effort, especially coming into a blended situation, because we had to be more intentional and spend the extra time trying to mesh the family together with the kids.
When we had that time.
Yeah, when we had that time to do that, you know, and your kids try to get them to a point where they considered me a stepdad and liked me, and my daughter where she considered you a stepmom and liked you. And then just, you know, school and sports and all the activities that take place. And, you know, it's real easy when you have all that kind of stuff going on to get burnout and to get exhausted and tired like we've talked before in this series.
As you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking of the moms that literally stay home or do stay home and do homeschooling. I mean, that's a lot when you're doing that in your home and you're trying to take care of the house at all times and just handle everything, while the husband goes out to work or vice versa. I mean, I sit there and I think that'd be easy. And my personality, I would get burnt out easy.
Yeah.
That would be a lot for me personally to take on. But I just think about everybody, all the moms and even dads, once you have your children, it does change everything.
Mm-hmm. And I know, bring up the homeschool situation. I know a lot of times with the homeschooling, that parent that stays home all the time likes to occasionally get away because they're constantly attached to home with the children. It's like a 24/7 thing for them almost, where the husband or the wife, whichever direction it goes, whoever's being the stay-at-home parent, the other one's usually out working and gone all the time. So then you have this scenario sometimes where the parent that stays home occasionally wants, I want to get out of here tonight. Let's go do something, get me away from all of this. I've been stuck here all week with the kids and I'm ready to go out and do something. And the other spouse like, well, I've been gone all week. I've been working constantly and I'm ready to sit on my chair and take a break, And so you have those scenarios sometimes that kind of work against each other too.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that can happen in a relationship when things start getting more complex and more complicated. And so it's something you really have to be conscious about. And as you was reading this story here that we have for an example, an illustration, it kind of went back and forth, between the two of how they were feeling and what they were thinking about it, the growing sadness that was coming up between them. They knew it was happening. Yeah. They could see it, but they weren't really being too proactive to try to stop it. They continued to, they almost got in a rut with it. As far as this story is going so far, they've kind of gotten into a rut with it. And, a lot of times I think that can happen because what we know is normal, sometimes we feel like that's the best it's going to get. And a lot of times that's just how life goes and how relationships are, and that's how our mind works. We know if we really sit there and think it through, that there's better things, and it could be better. But for some reason, when we get stuck in those ruts like that, we almost get to the point where we accept what's there and just take it for what it is, and we don't try to make things any better. And when that happens, you can actually go backwards, and it can just continue to get worse and worse if you don't do something about it. And so a lot of times, when you have these relationships where the two spouses do feel like they're just cohabiting, it's sometimes it's not, you have your times when it's just because you're too busy or you're too exhausted. You got other things that are going on, but sometimes it can be because a spouse is getting neglected. And it may not be intentional that that's happening, but when everything else starts piling on, we start neglecting each other to try to take care of all the stuff from the outside. And we don't realize that all good things usually come from the inside out, Yeah. And so you kind of have to reel yourself back and think about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And, in this episode here, we're not addressing neglect rooted in bitterness or willful abandonment. That kind of emotional distancing, we'll discuss that in a later episode. But right now, our focus is more on the subtle form of neglect, what we might call soft or unintentional neglect. And this happens when a couple gradually stops investing in their relationship, when the marriage begins to lose its place on the priority list. And most often, this shift comes from two common causes, which is overwhelming daily demands and a lack of thoughtfulness around meaningful relationship moments. And as we've talked about in our 4 Laws of Love series that we've done, this is where the priorities really needs to be paid close attention to. Because if you don't keep the priorities in the right order, then, we talked about where a lot of people put kids in front of their marriages, their spouses, but you can put a lot of things in there. Yeah. You could effectively put the husband and wife could effectively put themselves 5 or 6 spots down from God, because depending on what is more important to you at that moment and what you're going to invest all of your time into at the expense of neglecting each other, those are the things that are going to pile up between you two.
Right.
And then you're going to have this distance that's going to grow bigger and bigger because you have all of these other things that you piled up there in front of yourself. And then you unintentionally neglect each other, not thinking about it. And before you know it, it's too late. And you have a relationship that's not that great. And that can make you very unhappy in that situation.
Yeah.
Now, this kind of neglect doesn't usually come from cruelty or anger. Rather, it shows up in small decisions made without much thought. A spouse choosing to check emails instead of engaging in conversation, or turning to a screen instead of turning toward their partner. These choices may not be made with bad intentions, but over time they chip away at connection. So as you were talking here about this couple, Mia and Alex, their lives, they were packed with responsibilities, but it's not simply their busy schedule that's the issue. The real challenge is the pattern they've developed, one where they consistently pass up chances to reconnect. When those rare windows of free time appear, they don't take advantage of them, and instead they allow distractions, or the things that we like to call sacred space invaders, to steal away the moments that could be building intimacy. And so when you think about what they've done here by allowing this pattern to be developed in their relationship, can you look back at what we went through and see patterns
I think
that
a
we
lot
allowed?
of people. I mean, yeah, us. But I mean, in all reality, if you think about it, anybody with kids, this is going to be something that's challenged. And, whether, your kids are small and you have adult children, grandkids or whatever, there's a lot of times that this is very easily to get into. Mm-hmm. I mean, but yes, when we definitely had our children, it was just, I hate to say this, but it was easy not to turn to the intimacy of communication. Mm-hmm. It was easier to deal with the children. And like, for example, I come home this evening. We don't have little kids anymore, but I come home and I'm checked out. Like, it's been a long day at work and I'm just like, I just want everything to be quiet. I come in the house, I go out the back door and I lay down on the sofa outside, or a little outside chair thing. And I'm like, nobody talk to me. I just need, you came in, you talked to me, but I was like, I am not into it for the communication tonight. Like, so it's easy to do that whether you have children or not. It's just the intentional part of recognizing, hey, this is what's going on. I think you have to have a healthy relationship too sometimes to check my box of saying, hey, that's not healthy. We need to change this, because I don't feel like we were in a healthy environment back then, and we would have never recognized being intentional on communication at all. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And it's a pattern that we create within our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And they say practice makes perfect. So the more often that you allow something to happen and take place in life, regardless of what it is, it's not just secluded to marriage by any means. Right. It can happen anywhere, but it's definitely dangerous when it happens in a marriage where you allow certain things to continue happening to train yourself to all of a sudden be into a pattern of neglect, a sort of neglect that you would have for each other as spouses. It's something you never would have allowed at the very beginning of your relationship. But because life has happened and so much stuff has just overwhelmed, and, like you're talking about work, you and I both have, this is the first of the month, and it's very, very stressful the first of the month for both of us. And we got a trip coming up we're getting ready to go on, so that adds the pressure because we're trying to make sure we get everything done that we need to before we leave. And there's only so many days in a week and so many hours in a day, And so it makes it tough. And so we have to be careful of those patterns that we can allow to take place in our life and create those issues. So as we were talking, we called those sacred space invaders. We're going to talk about those for a little bit here. And if you guys remember the classic arcade game from the 80s called Space Invaders, I used to love playing that game. It was a very, very basic, simple game, but it was pretty fun. The objective was simple. You use your laser cannon to eliminate waves of incoming alien attackers. They actually were little blips on the screen.
Yes,
is all they were.
They were.
But as the game went on, their pace increased, the music intensified, and the pressure mounted. Inevitably, if you couldn't keep up, the aliens would descend and take over. Well, in much the same way, modern relationships face their own version of these invaders.
Good.
They may not be pixelated enemies on a screen, but they are just as persistent. Distractions, demands, and interruptions that creep into your daily life. These modern-day invaders swarm the space between you and your partner, threatening to take over valuable moments of connection and intimacy. Unlike the arcade game, this challenge isn't safely contained within four walls and a joystick. It's real, and it's happening every day. As we talk about these space invaders, these things that can come in and overwhelm us and take us over in our marriages, won't you give us a few ideas here of what those distractions could look like?
Your smartphone.
That's number one.
Yeah. Children.
Yep.
Television, DVRs, YouTube, Netflix, and countless of other streaming services. Work interruptions, computer or tablets, needy extended family members or friends, neighbors, or coworkers, social media, and video games. That's a good list.
That's a very good list.
Very good list.
Really just a small list.
And actually, I could probably
add tons more to that.
Not just that, but I'm sitting here thinking, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. That's me.
Yeah,
I mean, I do it in a healthy way. I mean, especially if you're up here working or doing something, I will, watch my Netflix or something, a show or something. But
society's almost made it easy for us to do this anymore.
But back then we didn't have social media, the smartphones and stuff like that. So I always often think of what the numbers were like back then versus what they are now because, divorce rate is a lot higher now than what it was back then. Well, you didn't have all the distractions back then.
Yeah. Well, you think of a Roku stick or a smart TV.
I love how you had a DVR.
Look at the countless, DVR, there's a lot of people that DVR shows and they'll sit there and binge them constantly.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That tells you how much we just don't do that.
We don't use one we have one, but we don't hardly ever use it because we don't watch. But we do have, Netflix and a couple things like that. And you can just as easily sit on one of those for 8 straight hours and just binge series after series.
There are some series that we would do that, yes.
But if you look down through your list on a Roku stick or on a smart TV, the amount of apps that are available today that have every movie that you can think of or series that you can think of, you can actually play games on some of them now. They'll let you download games. And you can play games on those smart TVs with those apps. And there's just so many interruptions that can come in between you. And it's just idleness. And it's not really good, I don't think, for all of us to sit there and just do that. But
it's good to put this out there to recognize some of that. I really like that. Sometimes we
have to be reminded, of what we're doing with our time. Because it's super, super easy to blow a whole evening, 4 or 5 hours of an evening. It is super easy to just blow through that and think, man, where'd that time go? I just started sitting here watching this 4 hours ago, and now it's almost midnight time to go to bed. And that time flies by so fast. And, if you think about it, what could that time have accomplished if you could have, just took that, spend time with your spouse or, your family, just to have some family time and that kind of thing. All the positive things that could have came out of that. And, it's just a good reminder to remind us how easy it is to neglect each other, how easy it is to neglect our family and our social, surroundings that we have. There's just so many things out there that is designed to take your time. And in today's fast-paced, always connected world, distractions are everywhere. Just as shown by that list that we just shared, and there's so much more we can add to that list. They compete for our attention day and night, showing up right when we're trying to focus on our partners. These distractions can sneak into our time together, just like the advancing waves of an old arcade game, fast-moving, relentless, and capable of overtaking our relationship if we're not careful. But we're not saying that you need to eliminate them entirely. That's both unrealistic and unnecessary. You can't ignore your kids. One humorous quote we've heard says, "We've identified the biggest threat to intimacy, and it sleeps down the hallway." Children, they take an enormous energy and seem to have an uncanny way of interrupting just when you and your partner are carving out a moment alone. And a lot of people let their kids sleep with them, and that creates a big, huge issue too with intimacy. So no, you're not likely to move off the grid to regain focus, and it wouldn't be wise to avoid your workplace responsibilities or cut off connection to extended family, friends, in the digital world. These elements are woven into our life these days, and the issue isn't about removing them completely. It's about learning how to guard the moments that matter, how to preserve time for connection when these distractions show up. And we have here two main reasons that one or both partners might feel neglected, or why the marriage starts to lose priority. The first is what we would call unintentional intrusions. What are those unintentional intrusions?
They're disruptions that happen without you seeking them out. You're not inviting them. They simply burst in. Maybe you're trying to have a meaningful talk and your toddler cries out from bed again. You're enjoying a show together when an unexpected work message lands in your inbox. Or you could be a nurse, a doctor, or in a job that requires responding immediately, and those calls come in during dinner. Perhaps a friend drops by right in the middle of a heart-to-heart with your spouse. Maybe you're enjoying a quiet time on your porch when a stranger knocks, asking for help with their stalled car. Or you're walking hand in hand on a rare date night only for your grown child to call in the middle of a personal crisis. That would be us.
Yeah.
Even an ex-spouse may need to discuss a parenting concern while you're trying to unwind. In all of these instances, you and your partner are trying to connect, but something unsought and beyond your control cuts into that space. Your attention is broken and the moment is lost, not because you chased the interruption, but because it found you.
So these previous examples that you just gave, and there's so many more that can be added to that list. And what's funny is I can resonate with a lot of those that you just read. And I know people that have that issue, that have different things like that happen, it seems like. But now we're going to look at what we call intentional or deliberate interruptions. And those moments is when the disruption comes from your own choices. And this doesn't mean that you're trying to intentionally disregard your spouse, but the result is still the same. The time you could have spent connecting is diverted elsewhere because of something that you chose to engage. The most common culprit in these situations is technology. In fact, there's even a term that describes this exact phenomenon. It's called technoference. It refers to the regular everyday ways that phones, tablets, or other digital tools interrupt time a couple spends together. For example, a spouse might take a call or check an incoming text during a conversation. In that moment, attention shifts from the relationship to the screen, breaking the flow of connection between partners. As one author put it, by allowing technology to interfere with or interrupt conversations, activities, and time with romantic partners, even when unintentional or for brief moments, individuals may be sending implicit messages about what they value most, leading to conflict and negative outcomes in personal life and relationships. And I know that when we talk to other people, it's not even our spouse, like we're talking to a friend or maybe it's just an acquaintance that we're staying there having a conversation with. And, I know for myself, if somebody's really engaged with me and they're talking about some deep subject that they're really into and they're really wanting me to hear what they have to say, And if my phone goes off or something, even though it might be something very important, that does run through my mind where do I look or do I not look? Because I don't want to make it look like I'm not interested in what they're telling me, because that's usually what happens. That's the insinuation you get when you're talking to someone and they start sitting there looking at their phone and, reading stuff or whatever. How do you feel about that?
There are times, though, I will look, and I'm sorry, my allergies have been the worst today. There are times that I will look at my phone depending on the conversation. But if it's a deep conversation, I flip my phone over or I put it somewhere where I cannot see it.
Yeah.
And, smartwatches, it's a distraction just as much because if you see the
it's an extension of your phone.
Yeah, the text message come across and you even glance at it, then you see something, it's like, oh gosh, it takes your mind off that. And it's not fair to the person trying to talk to you.
Well, I think the watch is even worse because then they might even think, well, are they like looking to see what time it is and because they're so
I didn't
bored
think about that.
I always think about that. I look at my watch like you were saying because it buzzed, so I know there's something there. But when I do glance at it, I think maybe I shouldn't have done that because now they're going to think I'm not, I'm like supposed to be somewhere else or whatever. My mind, all that stuff starts running through your mind. If you're going to be respectful.
Now that you've said that, I'm going to be like, oh gosh, I'm not ever going to look at
being
my
intentional
watch.
not look at it. Yeah, it's because watches are used for so many different things now. They don't just tell, some of them just tell time, but these smartwatches, they do everything else with that. And so you never know if somebody's like watching the clock, say, okay, I'm done with this conversation. I'm ready to go home or something. Or are they just trying to read a text or whatever, And so I am very self-conscious of that sometimes. I might do it and then catch myself like, maybe I shouldn't have done that, because they're going to think I'm not interested. And that's the last thing I want because that's not the case. But that's just an example, though, how it just creeps in and just becomes part of you,
That's good. Yeah.
And so there's another growing issue in modern relationships, and it's something known as phubbing. That's spelled with a PH, so PHUBBING. The fusion of the words phone and snubbing. When one person disengages from their partner in favor of their phone. It's a blend of two ideas, being on your phone and unintentionally brushing off the person in front of you. So here's an example. Picture this. You're out to dinner. And midway through the conversation, your partner starts scrolling through messages or casually checks football scores. Or maybe you're settled in for a movie night, and they're more interested in a social media feed than what's happening on screen. The impact is subtle but powerful. It sends the message, even if it's not spoken aloud, that the screen matters more than the person beside you.
So what do I say when you're on your phone and I turn around and look at you and I'm done with it? What do I always say?
Put your phone down?
No. Obviously, I don't say it enough. But I always say, I'm not going to compete with your phone. I always say that.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm not.
And you've actually said that in some episodes.
Yeah. I'm not competing with your phone. It just doesn't happen real often,
so I kind of forget.
So now I'm going to say, okay, phubbing is...
Quit phubbing.
Quit phubbing. I don't like that. I still don't like, I'm not competing with your phone.
Yeah. Well, the issue with these kinds of interruptions goes deeper than just distractions. First, they send a message of disregard, and whether it's intentional or not, your spouse may begin to feel invisible, quietly wondering if they matter less than whatever is happening on your screen. Over time, this sense of being overlooked leaves people feeling less valued. The second consequence is that the relationship loses moments of genuine face-to-face connection, the kind that builds closeness and intimacy. So think about smartphones. You and your partner can be in the same room, sitting side by side, and yet feel completely disconnected. Studies suggest that we check our phones every 6 minutes, or around 150 times a day.
Wow.
With constant alerts, buzzing apps, social feeds, video clips, news updates, and streaming options, our phones constantly compete for attention like a clingy third wheel in your relationship. And that's an interesting way to look at that, being a third wheel. But, with the technology that we have, it does, like you mentioned earlier, it does make you wonder, what was it? Well, we know what it was like before we had them because you and I are old enough to remember that. But we weren't necessarily in
We
full-blown...
didn't even have smart TVs.
We weren't in full-blown marriage relationships
No.
during that time. 'Cause I remember when I got my first bag phone is what it was. I was like 21 probably, something like that when I got my first one. And then it was a few years later on, before they finally came out with the wireless phones. But those weren't smartphones. Those only called. Those only made phone calls. And so it wasn't like you could just sit there and scroll on it all the time because there wasn't nothing to see. So I do kind of remember, I remember what it was like back before that. And I do remember growing up, we didn't have a TV till I was like 12 years old. And so we were forced out, to be outside a lot playing and being, constructive and, creative and all that kind of thing. And unfortunately today, a lot of kids don't know what that looks like. They don't know what that means. And so I think that we're probably raising a generation of kids today that it's probably going to be just getting worse with marriages and stuff because they've been trained from a little kid how to be distracted on a phone or a tablet all the time. Yeah. And so it's just going to make it worse. And so to be clear, as we close up this episode for this week, it's not an attack on technology. That's not what we're after here today. Michelle and I use ours all the time as well. Not all screen time is harmful. In many cases, digital communications like text, video calls, or messaging apps can bring couples closer when they're physically apart. A thoughtful message during the workday or a shared meme can brighten your spouse's day and reinforce connection. We've got family members that are military. That's one thing that I can think of that this technology comes in, great, because if you've got a spouse that's overseas somewhere or whatever, and they've got FaceTime now and that kind of thing, if they've got access to all of that, that's a good way that you can actually talk to each other, not face to face, but you're face to face on the screens. You actually get to see each other. And I think that helps a lot in those situations. So it's one of these necessary evils, as they call them. They have goods and they have bads. There's just depending on how you use them. So the real danger isn't really in the technology, it's in the timing. When you're with your spouse, those sacred moments of togetherness can quietly be eroded by distractions. The problem often isn't grand, loud, or intentional. It's just a slow fade, like we've talked about towards the beginning of this series. And that fade happens when you allow attention stealers to slip into the moments designed for connection. Couples who unintentionally drift into being roommates often fail to guard those moments. But those who want to shift from simply married to genuinely connected learn to protect those sacred spaces. These moments are the relationship's home base. If distractions destroy that, the bond becomes vulnerable. So don't let the outside interruptions win. You need to protect your connection like you'd defend something precious, because that relationship that you have with your spouse is definitely that.
So good.
It is precious. And so I think that, if anything with this episode of this half of it that we've, shared this week, the takeaway from this probably is mainly just to remind us that we do have a human being sitting opposite of us, all the time when we're together. And we have to, again, this is something you have to be intentional.
Yeah.
You've got to be proactive, which makes it even better. Because if you do make sure that you don't let those things take the place of your spouse, that makes the spouse feel that much better about their relationship because they know you're being intentional and that you do want to talk. You'd rather talk to them than be on your devices all the time. And I think, as we go through all of this, and Michelle and I have to watch this just as much as anybody does, you have to, try to figure out your processes of how you spend your time and how you're going to navigate through the use of technology or having your moments, talking together. Because there's times when both of you are doing separate things. You could be sitting in the same room, but like there's TV shows and stuff that you like to watch where I'm not particularly wholly interested in that, but I still want to be in there with you. And so I might sit there and play a game on my phone or something while you're watching the show. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because we are both doing something at that moment that we're enjoying, but we're still there together.
Yeah.
And if we have something to say, we can look at each other and talk or whatever. And to me, that's a certain kind of a bonding moment that I have with you. But we also have all of our moments where those devices aren't in the equation also. You got to have a balance in all of that. So next week when we come back, we're going to finish this episode. We're going to be talking about protecting sacred moments. And we're going to be talking about 3 different types of sacred moments that are worth recognizing and protecting. So you don't want to miss that. Or is there anything that you want to add to this week's episode before we take off for this week?
No.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and call it a wrap then for this week's episode. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys here next week as we come up with the next half of this episode. So until then, we just pray that your marriage is stronger and your walk with God is closer. This is an extension of Connecting the Gap Ministries, and we pray that you have a blessed week.